The scent of conditioned air and aging cardboard defines the operational center of stalled justice. It is a flavorless, institutional atmosphere, perpetually humming with the low, grinding noise of overworked ventilation. A sound that promises neither freshness nor clarity. The evidence room, often depicted in fiction as a neatly organized vault, is in reality a labyrinth of stacked, standardized boxes. Their beige surfaces dulled by layers of fine, settled dust. Each container holds the physical remnants of a search for truth. Shreds of fabric, sealed plastic bags containing key fobs or dried blood, reams of printed emails, and the thin, brittle hopes of victims and investigators alike. They overflow onto metal shelving units bolted to concrete walls, a silent testament to the work perpetually pending. Here, within this crowded mausoleum of inquiry, rests another layer of failure, a procedural termination far more unsettling than an unsolvable puzzle.
Dengan cahaya sorot yang kejam, stempel kuningan itu menjatuhkan vonisnya. Sebuah akhir absolut tertera jelas di atas kertas.
These are the cases not abandoned due to a dead end, but those deliberately forced into silence by command structure. The hand of powerful interests reaching down through layers of bureaucracy to place a heavy, leaden seal upon active files. The frustration of the dedicated investigator is a palpable, almost metallic tang in the air of the precinct. A blend of righteous anger and the bitter realization that some lines of inquiry are simply not allowed to be crossed, regardless of the objective data pointing towards culpability. The official order always arrives in the same dispassionate format: a numbered memorandum printed in crisp black ink on heavy bond paper, signed by a supervisory authority several rungs above the lead detective's immediate chain of command, often routed through legal counsel or interagency relations. The language is sterile, legalistic, and devoid of explanatory context beyond citing jurisdictional overlap, budgetary reassessment, or national security concerns. The effect is immediate and devastating. The physical closure of an investigation that was breathing, active, and gathering momentum. It is the cold procedural language of the stop order juxtaposed against the messy human chaos contained within the surrounding cardboard boxes. A stark contradiction that defines the nature of institutional obstruction. We begin our examination with the first such investigation, one that was not solved, but simply smothered.
Menara perak membelah langit, cerminan tajam dari ambisi korporat yang menjulang tinggi dan tanpa emosi, di bawah cahaya siang yang brutal.
Detective First-Grade Miller specialized in the forensic accounting of high-stakes financial crime. A discipline demanding infinite patience and an eye for the anomalies buried within millions of lines of data. His current focus, codenamed Operation Silver Point, centered on a massive systemic collapse involving an investment conglomerate that had seemingly evaporated funds across 3 continents. The scale of the deceit was breathtaking, marked by layers of shell corporations and phantom subsidiaries that stretched like an architectural drawing of a spider's web across offshore jurisdictions. The investigation was housed not in the evidence room, but in a dedicated, windowless annex, air-conditioned to protect the temperature-sensitive servers and monitors that constantly displayed scrolling sheets of financial metrics. The ambient sound was the gentle, rhythmic click of multiple keyboards and the whisper of printers churning out transaction records.
The scent of the annex was sharply defined: fresh printer toner, machine heat, and the faint, polished aroma of mahogany and expensive paper.
Remnants carried back from raids on the conglomerate's sealed, mirrored towers downtown. Miller and his team were meticulously following a paper trail that did not just lead to corporate misconduct, but suggested a deeply embedded mechanism designed specifically to facilitate impunity. They had achieved a breakthrough in tracing a series of non-performing loans back to their original benefactors.
These loans, initially dismissed as high-risk but standard investment failures, were revealed to be strategic payouts disguised as lending, designed to funnel liquid assets into politically sensitive trusts.
The critical evidence was contained in 312 physical binders, indexed and cross-referenced.
Miller remembers the specific texture of the pages, thick, glossy stock favored by auditors, and the weight of the binders themselves, heavy with the implied gravity of institutional fraud. They had just uncovered the final layer of protection, a shadow board of directors whose identities were shielded by complex trust instruments. Individuals whose names whispered of regulatory oversight bodies, major political campaign donors, and, critically, figures who held sway over state infrastructure contracts. The trail was hot, smelling, as the summary stated, of fresh printer toner and polished mahogany, leading directly to the highest echelons of power, where government interface met global capital. The stop order arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. It was delivered not by the standard internal messenger service, but by a legal counsel, stiff-backed and impeccably dressed, carrying a single sealed envelope marked "Privileged." The air in the annex suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. The memo cited an immediate and irreversible withdrawal of jurisdictional mandate, citing a potential conflict with ongoing federal market stabilization efforts and the necessity of preserving investor confidence.
The language was deliberately vague, yet absolute.
Miller knew instantly the implications. They had not merely found a crime. They had found protected territory. The mandated shutdown involved the physical removal of all server hardware and the sealing of the 312 binders. Miller watched, unable to intervene, as uniformed security detail meticulously boxed up every piece of evidence. The binders were wrapped in thick, tamper-proof plastic sheeting, their contents effectively quarantined. The final unsettling detail was the instruction to scrub all digital records from the local network, leaving only a cryptic one-line entry in the master case management system. S-point, resolution, administrative closure per 0920 memo. The investigation, which required a mastery of intricate, invisible structures, was sealed off by the visible structure of absolute institutional authority, leaving Miller staring at the faint circular indentations on the desk where the weight of the evidence had once rested. The scent of toner slowly faded, replaced by the bitter, lingering scent of defeat. Case 2. The Silent Car and the Coastal Fog.
The disappearance of Elias Vance was not spectacular. It was eerily quiet.
Vance, a mid-level government analyst, known for his meticulous, if sometimes politically inconvenient, attention to detail regarding municipal contracting, vanished on a Thursday night in late autumn. His car, a pristine, dark sedan, was discovered the following morning, abandoned on a lonely, fog-shrouded stretch of coastal highway. This area was characterized by crashing waves, jagged black rocks, and a pervasive, chilling dampness that seeped into the bones.
Lead Detective Reyes specialized in missing persons, understanding that the absence of evidence often spoke volumes.
The scene of the discovery provided the primary physical data. The vehicle was locked, undisturbed, and parked perfectly parallel to the white line of the road. Inside, Vance's briefcase lay open on the passenger seat, containing his wallet, identification, and a half-eaten sandwich still wrapped in greaseproof paper. An indication that his departure had been sudden and unplanned, but not violent. There were no signs of struggle, no skid marks, no broken glass. The silence of the scene was profound, a vacuum officially decreed unbreakable. Reyes and his team spent weeks trawling the dense, wet shrubbery and inspecting the tidal zones for any sign of a body or struggle. They focused intensely on the car itself. Every surface was dusted, every fiber cataloged. The precision of the vehicle's abandonment was the key anomaly.
Why would someone intent on suicide or escape lock their doors? Why leave behind the means to identify themselves?
The initial breakthrough came from the car's GPS history, which revealed Vance had not been driving toward his intended destination, but rather to a secluded, high-end private residence further up the coast. A property owned by the family of a powerful figure in local political maneuvering. A man known for his deep investment in the municipal projects Vance had been quietly scrutinizing. Reyes felt the subtle shift in the investigative atmosphere almost immediately. Requests for warrant applications regarding the private property began to encounter unusual delays.
Standard requests for surveillance footage from nearby toll booths were returned incomplete or corrupted.
The investigative narrative was slowly and methodically being redirected by unseen forces, guiding it toward the official conclusion of voluntary departure or accidental drowning. The tension peaked when Reyes attempted to interview a key witness, a retired toll booth attendant who had described a second, older model sedan parked near Vance's vehicle just before dawn. The witness abruptly recanted his statement after receiving an unscheduled visit from an unnamed individual claiming to represent coastal security interests. The mandatory cessation order arrived via certified mail, addressed directly to the precinct chief, bypassing Reyes entirely. The document detailed a formal jurisdictional transfer to an ad hoc coastal security task force, citing the sensitive nature of operations near international shipping lanes. The subtext, clearly understood by everyone in the room, was that the investigation had infringed upon territory protected by extreme political gravity. The order demanded the immediate impounding of all physical evidence, specifically the pristine sedan, which was towed to an unlisted governmental storage facility and sealed. The official case file was stripped back to the bare necessities, focusing only on the description of the vehicle and the coordinates of the discovery site. The extensive witness interview transcripts, the detailed fiber reports, and, crucially, the GPS data pointing toward the private residence were all placed in an Annex A folder marked Temporarily Restricted Access.
Reyes spent the next 2 days walking the sterile, white-tiled corridors of the precinct, the relentless salt and fog smell of the coast seemingly clinging to his coat collar, despite the dry air conditioning.
The official silence that descended upon Vance's case was heavier than the thickest ocean fog, a silence officially decreed unbreakable. The only remaining physical link was the evidence room tag number assigned to the half-eaten sandwich, forever preserved in a plastic bag, a silent, biodegradable testament to an inquiry cut short by command.
Case 3. The Archival Crypt and the Dancing Dust.
Not all investigations begin with fresh crime scenes or immediate threats. Some are cold cases, historical enigmas that demand the expertise of institutional memory and deep archival diving. Case 3 involved a decades-old historical truth rooted in wartime secrets and post-conflict political expediency. A mystery surrounding the sudden, unexplained collapse of a critical infrastructure project decades ago. An incident officially attributed to structural failure, but perpetually rumored to involve sabotage and the intentional suppression of uncomfortable truths regarding interagency espionage. Dr. Elena Vargas was the lead forensic historian assigned to the case, working closely with the Internal Affairs Division, seeking to connect the brittle, faded documents of the past to the present-day reality of institutional accountability. Her operational base was not a sterile lab, but the vast, subterranean archives of the National Records Repository, a place defined by the smell of aged paper, acidic ink, and the pervasive chill necessary for long-term preservation. The investigation was a slow, granular process of reconstruction, piecing together fragments of telegrams, handwritten memos, and brittle organizational charts. The critical breakthrough centered on a specific tranche of files from the wartime mobilization period, documents known colloquially within the archival community as the Gray Dossiers. These files had been repeatedly requested over the years by independent historians, but always denied access under vague classification rules. Vargas managed to obtain provisional access through a complex legal maneuver involving the Freedom of Information Act and a specific, narrow-scope judicial order. This allowed her and her small team access to the restricted sub-level vaults, secure governmental basements hidden deep beneath the capital city. The atmosphere was tomb-like. Vast, silent aisles of steel shelving holding tightly bound linen boxes. The only light came from limited, high-wattage security lamps, creating dramatic shadows where dust motes danced perpetually in the limited, golden shaft of light filtering down from the access ladder. Vargas began the painstaking examination of the gray dossiers, immediately noticing an anomaly. The numbering sequence was broken. Several critical boxes, specifically those indexed to engineering reports from the final year of the infrastructure project, were missing. They were not marked as transferred or destroyed. They simply did not exist within the designated shelving location. Through persistent cross-referencing of internal accession logs, Vargas located a reference to the missing boxes. They were not destroyed, but relocated years earlier under a high-level executive order to an off-site, hyper-secure facility, administered by a specialized governmental body dealing with strategic material and defense technology. This revelation, that the most critical evidence relating to a domestic incident of structural failure was classified under international defense protocols, was the investigative needle that snapped the thread. Vargas recognized that the truth was not merely suppressed, it was actively protected under the umbrella of national security. Suggesting the wartime secret was not failure, but intentional, politically sanctioned malfeasance veiled by post-war amnesties. Her physical access to the repository was revoked immediately. The stop order arrived not as a memo, but as a delegation of armed civilian security personnel arriving at the archive access door. Vargas and her team were physically barred from accessing critical, fragile files. The order, delivered verbally and subsequently reinforced by a printed official notice, cited unauthorized penetration of classified material chains of custody and a mandated reorganization of historical inquiry priorities. The investigation ceased instantly. Vargas was escorted out of the repository, the heavy steel door clanging shut behind her, sealing in the silence and the truth. The irony was devastating. The physical evidence of the decades-old cover-up remained intact, brittle but readable. Locked away in a governmental basement, protected not by age or decay, but by the cold, effective enforcement of governmental classification. The last image Vargas held was the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light, perpetually suspended, forever illuminated, but unreachable. Case 4. The White Walls of Mandated Silence. The environment of Case 4 was the antithesis of the dust-choked archive. This investigation focused on a chilling instance of official misconduct and potential systemic failure within a highly secured governmental and military facility. A sterile, white-walled atmosphere defined by order, precision, and rigid adherence to protocol. Detective Sergeant Hayes was tasked with investigating the death of a civilian contractor inside the facility. The official report described a fall during routine maintenance, but leaked internal communications suggested a cover-up involving improper safety procedures, potentially exacerbated by an unauthorized, non-standard experiment taking place nearby. Hayes' team entered a world of clean lines, controlled access points, and the incessant, high-pitched hum of powerful air filtration systems. The air smelled of ozone and industrial cleaning agents, a clinical, oppressive scent designed to sanitize not just the environment, but the narrative. The key to the investigation lay in witness testimony, specifically the accounts of 4 junior military personnel who had been on shift in the sterile cleanroom environment when the incident occurred. Initially, these witnesses provided coherent, detailed accounts, characterizing the frantic atmosphere and the unusual behavior of several senior supervisory staff immediately following the contractor's death. These vital testimonies suggested a deliberate delay in calling external medical help and an immediate, organized effort to remove equipment from the scene.
However, as Hayes began to formalize the statements for cross-examination, the process encountered intense friction.
The witnesses were abruptly transferred out of state.
Their initial testimonies, already recorded and transcribed, vanished from the local shared server.
They were replaced by carefully crafted institutional narratives, sequential, standardized reports signed by superior officers, which meticulously corroborated the official story of accidental fall and structural failure, contradicting every emotional or anecdotal detail previously provided.
Hayes recognized the technique. The truth was being erased not through physical destruction, but through bureaucratic replacement.
The human element was systematically withdrawn and substituted by procedural documentation.
The sterile, white-walled atmosphere became a metaphor for the investigation itself, bleached of all complexity and human error.
Hayes demanded access to the facility's internal security logs and surveillance footage. The request was met with a flood of numbered dossiers.
These documents, arriving in heavy boxes, were meticulously indexed but utterly useless. Hundreds of pages of access logs were provided, but the specific entries for the date and time of the incident were redacted, using opaque, military-grade black bars.
The surveillance footage was provided only in the form of low-resolution still frames, capturing only the designated walkways and deliberately omitting the operational floor where the event took place.
Every piece of documentation seemed designed not to inform, but to overwhelm and misdirect. The investigation reached its inevitable, mandated retreat when the Department of Defense formally asserted military jurisdiction over all aspects of the inquiry.
Citing national security concerns related to the sensitive technology housed within the facility. The immediate cessation order arrived as a thick, blue-backed document, hand-delivered by a colonel in dress uniform.
The language was non-negotiable, stating that any further civilian inquiry constituted obstruction of a critical military operation. The order explicitly demanded the sealing of all gathered material, which was immediately categorized as restricted operational data. Hayes's team was instructed to destroy all working notes and handwritten annotations, the raw, messy data that contained the lingering scent of initial doubt and contradiction. Hayes watched as the vital testimony that had vanished from the server was now physically manifested in the official action, a mandated retreat from uncovering systemic failure under military jurisdiction. The clean, antiseptic environment had successfully absorbed the inquiry, leaving behind only the sterile, unchallenged institutional narrative, preserved within sealed, numbered dossiers now residing in an untouchable government vault.
Case 5. The Red String and the Transnational Reach.
The final case documented a protracted probe into organized transnational crime, an investigation that stretched far beyond local jurisdiction, tracing a complex network of influence that extended from the grittiest urban landscape to polished municipal chambers in distant capital cities.
Detective Soto managed the investigation, Operation Chimera, which focused on a sophisticated laundering operation funneling illicit profits from narcotics and human trafficking through legitimate infrastructure contracts and municipal bonds. Soto's headquarters was the opposite of Case 4's sterility. It was defined by the sensory overload of the working city.
Stale coffee stains, the smell of ozone from the nearby traffic, and the constant echo of street noise filtering through the reinforced glass.
The investigation was physically represented by the massive corkboard that dominated Soto's office. It was a sprawling map of connections, covered in photocopied financial records, blurred surveillance photographs, and dozens of different colors of tangled red string, tracing the links between street-level enforcers, mid-tier banking facilitators, and, increasingly,
figures within the city's planning and regulatory departments.
Soto's team was deeply embedded in the gritty urban landscape, painstakingly gathering evidence that connected neon-lit back alleys, the sites of cash drops and clandestine meetings.
The jarring shift from chaos to institutional calm was palpable. Only the distant click of keyboards dared to break the perfect, cool white order of the marble expanse. They established a clear pattern of bribery that guaranteed regulatory approval for certain high-density real estate developments,
funded entirely by transnational criminal profits. The critical phase began when Soto successfully flipped a low-level financial consultant who provided the necessary key to decrypt a series of encrypted communications. This data confirmed direct, protected communication channels between the criminal syndicate's leadership and a specific, highly placed non-elected official responsible for licensing and zoning.
This official had previously been untouchable, shielded by layers of vague administrative oversight and campaign financing records.
The investigation was on the cusp of executing a series of high-profile arrests, ready to seize hundreds of millions in assets and dismantle the entire local node of the transnational network.
The momentum was palpable. The corkboard was dense, the red string vibrating with energy, all pointing toward a massive institutional infiltration.
Then, the immediate cessation order arrived.
It was delivered late on a Friday afternoon, a time traditionally reserved for burying bad news.
The order was terse and specific. Operation Chimera was to be immediately placed into deep review status,
citing unforeseen complexity regarding extraterritorial political sensitivities.
The institutional chill was unmistakable. Soto understood that the investigation had inadvertently trespassed upon protected territory, not just the territory of corrupt local officials,
but the sphere of influence of powerful foreign entities whose stability and cooperation were deemed vital to international trade and diplomatic relations.
The criminal network was not just criminal, it was institutionally useful to certain foreign policy goals.
Or at least too entrenched to be destabilized without significant, undesirable diplomatic fallout.
The procedural termination was swift and brutal. All seized assets were immediately frozen and placed under the management of an independent, internationally focused compliance board, effectively removing them from the domestic prosecutorial chain.
The corkboard, the visible manifestation of 3 years of relentless work, was designated as material evidence, subject to off-site archiving.
Soto was ordered to supervise the removal of the corkboard.
He stood watching the physical dismantling of his life's work.
The careful, agonizing snipping of the tangled red string.
The gentle peeling of the photocopied faces from the cork surface.
It was an act of profound investigative castration.
As the technicians meticulously rolled the evidence into tubes and sealed them in archival boxes,
Soto was left staring at the exposed, pin-pricked surface of the corkboard.
It was pockmarked with thousands of tiny holes,
each marking an unanswered question, a dangling lead, a connection forever severed by command.
The collective profile of these 5 cases, the financial architect's paper trail,
the coastal analyst's pristine car,
the wartime historian's brittle documents,
the military facility's blank dossiers,
and the transnational probe's tangled red string paints a vivid, troubling picture of justice delayed and denied.
The common denominator is not the lack of evidence, the absence of diligence,
or the incompetence of the investigators.
It is the overwhelming, systemic presence of authority deployed not to uncover truth,
but to preserve order, stability, and the established power hierarchy.
Each investigation reached a point of critical mass, a threshold where the pursuit of objective truth directly threatened the operational integrity of powerful, often unseen, governmental or commercial structures.
The evidence room remains the final resting place for these inquiries. They sit in their assigned boxes,
marked with their sterile inventory numbers. Their contents sealed and silenced. For the investigators involved, Miller, Reyes, Vargas, Hayes, and Soto, the psychological weight of institutional obstruction remains heavier than any physical evidence.
They carry the phantom weight of what they know to be true.
The knowledge that the closure was administrative, political, and absolute.
They achieved the impossible task of finding the truth, only to be given the mandatory, chilling order to forget it.
The official record states these cases are closed, resolved, or transferred.
The silent evidence room knows they are merely buried, waiting perhaps for a time when the powerful hands that sealed them away have finally relinquished their grip. But until that moment, they are 5 chilling examples of the deliberate curtailment of justice held captive by command.